Welcome to our channel, where we dive into the deepest corners of human emotions, uncovering stories of love, betrayal, and redemption. Tonight, we bring you a tale that will grip your heart and keep you on the edge of your seat. This is the story of a betrayal so profound, it left nothing but destruction in its wake. A journey through trust shattered, emotions unraveled, and the fight to rebuild from the ruins. A betrayal that ended in complete destruction is not just a story, it's a confession, an exploration of the raw, unfiltered emotions that come with love and loss. So, sit back, turn off the lights, and immerse yourself in this intense, emotional roller coaster. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that connect to the soul. Now, let's begin. They say life is a tapestry, woven from the threads of our choices, our values, and the people we hold closest. For me, those threads had always felt solid, unbreakable. I was raised in a family that valued honesty above all else. My father, a carpenter with calloused hands and a heart as sturdy as the oak he worked with, taught me that a man's word was his bond. My mother, soft-spoken but resolute, instilled in me the belief that loyalty was the foundation of any relationship. I carried these lessons with me, letting them shape the person I would become, a man who believed in love, commitment, and the beauty of building something lasting. It was this belief that led me to Sarah. From the moment we met, she felt like the missing piece to my carefully constructed world. Sarah was vibrant, the kind of person whose laughter could light up a room. She had an energy about her that drew people in, a magnetism I couldn't resist. We met at a charity event. I was there to volunteer, and she was the event coordinator, orchestrating everything with a grace that left me in awe. She made me feel alive, like I had found someone who understood me in ways I hadn't thought possible. Our relationship grew quickly, but it never felt rushed. We spent hours talking about our dreams, our fears, and the lives we wanted to build. She told me she admired my integrity, my dedication to my work as an architect, where I poured my heart into designing homes that would become the foundation of others' lives. I admired her ambition, her ability to juggle her career, and her relentless desire to make the world a better place. Together, we felt unstoppable. A team bound by shared values and an unspoken promise to never let each other down. When we moved in together, it felt like the next natural step. Our apartment became a sanctuary, a space where we could escape the chaos of the outside world and just be us. Every morning, we shared coffee and quiet moments before heading off to our demanding jobs. Every evening, we found comfort in each other's arms, whispering promises of forever into the night. It wasn't perfect, no relationship is, but it was ours, and I believed in it with every fiber of my being. I never imagined that belief would be tested. But life has a way of unraveling even the strongest threads. It started with small things, almost imperceptible at first. Sarah's laugh, the one I loved so much, seemed to come less easily. She started spending more time on her phone, her thumb scrolling through endless messages with a flicker of tension on her face. At first, I dismissed it. Her job had always been demanding, and she often handled crises for the events she managed. But this felt different. There was a distance growing between us, subtle but undeniable. Her late nights became more frequent. "It's just work," she would say, kissing me on the cheek before heading out the door with her laptop bag slung over her shoulder. "I'll try not to wake you when I come back." And she didn't. She became a ghost, slipping into bed at hours I never caught, her side of the mattress cold until dawn. I wanted to believe her, to trust that the woman I loved wouldn't lie to me. But trust is a fragile thing, and doubt is a seed that grows quickly once planted. It wasn't just the late nights. There were whispers of secrecy in her actions. Her phone, once left carelessly on the coffee table, was now always with her, even when she went to the bathroom. She started locking it with a new passcode, one I didn't know. When I asked her about it, she smiled and said, "It's just for work security." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But the nagging feeling in my chest refused to be silenced. Conversations between us became stilted, punctuated by silences that neither of us seemed to know how to fill. I tried to bridge the gap, planning date nights, surprising her with little gestures, a bouquet of her favorite daisies, a handwritten note left on her pillow. She smiled, thanked me, but there was a hollowness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. It was as if she was somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't follow. One evening, I came home to find her sitting on the couch, her laptop open but her eyes staring blankly at the screen. She didn't hear me come in, and for a moment, I just watched her. She looked lost. I sat down beside her, resting a hand on her knee. She startled, closing the laptop quickly. "You scared me," she said, her laugh forced and brittle. "What's going on, Sarah?" I asked softly. "You've been distant lately." She hesitated, her gaze darting away from mine. "It's just work," she repeated. "I'm sorry if I've been distracted. Things are really hectic right now." I nodded, though her words did little to soothe the unease gnawing at me. "I'm here if you need to talk. You know that, right?" "I know," she said, leaning in to kiss me. But the kiss lacked warmth, and as she pulled away, I felt colder than ever. The tension in our home became a constant presence, an invisible weight pressing down on me. I found myself scrutinizing her every move, searching for clues that might explain the distance between us. I hated myself for it, for doubting her, for letting my insecurities take root. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that there was a piece of the puzzle I was missing. One night, as I lay awake in bed, listening to the sound of Sarah's steady breathing beside me, I realized I was afraid. Afraid of losing her. Afraid of what I might find if I kept digging. But more than anything, I was afraid of what our love had become. A shadow of the vibrant connection we once shared. And I couldn't help but wonder if it was already too late to save it. The night it all unraveled started like any other. Sarah had been quieter than usual, picking at her dinner while her phone buzzed incessantly on the table. She ignored the calls, but her unease was palpable. When I asked if everything was okay, she smiled, that same hollow smile I'd grown used to, and assured me it was just work again. I nodded, trying to push the creeping suspicion out of my mind. After dinner, she excused herself to take a call in the bedroom, leaving me alone in the living room with nothing but my thoughts. The weight of the past few months settled heavily on my chest, and I found myself staring at her phone, still on the dining table, the screen glowing faintly with an incoming notification. My heart raced as I picked it up, a mix of guilt and desperation coursing through me. I knew this was a line I shouldn't cross, but something inside me screamed that I had to know. The notification was innocuous enough, just a message preview from someone named Aiden. I tapped it before I could second guess myself, and the app opened to reveal a string of messages that hit me like a punch to the gut. "I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Last night was amazing. I wish we could have stayed longer." My vision blurred as I scrolled through the thread, my hands trembling. There were photos, nothing explicit, but intimate nonetheless. The kind of photos you'd only send to someone you were more than just friends with. My stomach churned, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. It felt like the ground beneath me had given way, leaving me free falling into an abyss. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I heard the bedroom door open. Sarah's voice startled me back to reality. "What are you doing with my phone?" she asked, her tone sharp, defensive. I looked up at her, the phone still in my hand. "Who is Aiden?" My voice was steady, but inside I was crumbling. Her face paled, and for a moment, she was frozen, her eyes darting between me and the phone. Then she sighed, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of the world had just been dropped onto her. "It's not what you think," she began, but the crack in her voice betrayed her. "Don't," I snapped, standing up. "Don't lie to me." I read the messages, Sarah. I saw the pictures. My voice rose with each word, the hurt and anger bubbling to the surface. How long has this been going on? She opened her mouth to speak but closed it again, as if searching for the right words. Finally, she said, "It's complicated." Complicated? I repeated, my voice thick with disbelief. You've been sneaking around behind my back, and the best you can come up with is, "It's complicated?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. She reached for me, but I stepped back, the distance between us now feeling insurmountable. "Please, let me explain," she pleaded. "Explain what? How you've been lying to me for God knows how long? How you've made me question everything we've built together?" My voice cracked, and I hated the vulnerability it revealed. "You've destroyed us, Sarah. Do you even realize that?" She started to cry then, her shoulders shaking as sobs racked her body. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she choked out. "I didn't mean for it to happen." I wanted to scream, to break something, to erase the last few minutes from existence, but instead I just stood there staring at the woman I thought I knew, wondering how I had been so blind. "Who is he?" I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated before answering. "He's someone I met through work. It started off innocent, I swear. We were just friends. But then—" Her voice trailed off and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "But then what?" I demanded. "You decided I wasn't enough? That our life together wasn't enough?" "It's not like that," she said, shaking her head. "I love you, but—" "Don't you dare say you love me," I interrupted, the words slicing through the air like a knife. "You don't do this to someone you love?" The room fell silent. The only sound, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of my shattered reality. The woman standing before me was a stranger now, her tears doing nothing to soften the anger burning inside me. "Do you love him?" I asked finally, the question hanging in the air like a storm cloud. She didn't answer right away, and the silence was deafening. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I don't know." Those 3 words hit me harder than anything else she said. I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. "I need to get out of here," I muttered, grabbing my keys from the counter. "Wait," she called after me, but I was already halfway out the door. I couldn't stay, not in that apartment, not with her. I needed space, time to think, to process what had just happened. As I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind replayed the night's events over and over, each memory sharper than the last. The betrayal, the lies, the sheer audacity of it all. It was too much to bear. I pulled over to the side of the road, gripping the steering wheel tightly as tears streamed down my face. The pain was unbearable, a weight pressing down on my chest until I could hardly breathe. I had loved her with everything I had, and she had thrown it all away for someone else. And yet beneath the hurt and anger, a new emotion began to take root. Something darker, more dangerous. Revenge. I returned home the next morning, my body drained, but my mind sharp, fixed on the confrontation that was inevitable. The apartment was quiet, save for the muffled sounds of Sarah moving around in the kitchen. She glanced up as I entered, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red from a night of tears. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but cold. She nodded, setting down the coffee mug in her hands. "I know." I didn't wait for her to speak first. "How long has it been, Sarah? How long have you been lying to me?" "A few months," she admitted, her voice trembling. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. I didn't mean for it to happen." "You didn't mean for it to happen?" I snapped, the words dripping with sarcasm. "What, did you just trip and fall into his arms? Into his bed?" I couldn't stop myself. The anger I'd tried to suppress all night was boiling over, spilling out in harsh, venomous words. She flinched, but I didn't care. She had done this. She had broken us. "It started as friendship," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the floor. "He understood me in ways I felt you didn't. I was stressed with work, and he was there." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, of course, the classic excuse, I didn't understand you, so you found someone who did. How convenient. It's not that simple, she cried, her voice rising. You've been so consumed with your work, with your projects. I felt like I was invisible to you, like I didn't matter anymore. I stared at her, incredulous. So, your solution was to cheat? To betray me? Do you have any idea what you've done? Her tears started again, but this time I wasn't moved. She reached for me, but I stepped back, the space between us feeling like a canyon. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered. Well, congratulations, I said, my voice cold. You succeeded. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of her confession hanging heavy in the air. Then, unable to stop myself, I asked the question that had been burning in my mind all night. Did you sleep with him? Her hesitation was answer enough. My chest tightened, the betrayal cutting deeper than I thought possible. How many times? I demanded. How many times did you let him touch you, Sarah? How many times did you let him into the life we built together? I don't know, she stammered, her voice barely audible. It wasn't about the physical. Don't, I interrupted, holding up a hand. Don't try to downplay this. Don't insult me further by pretending it wasn't about what it so clearly was. She sank into the couch, her head in her hands. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, I shot back. Sorry doesn't undo the lies, the betrayal, the nights I spent wondering why you were pulling away from me while you were with him. As the tension between us reached its peak, there was a knock at the door. I froze, the sound jarring in the silence. Sarah's head shot up, panic flashing in her eyes. My stomach turned as I realized who it might be. Who is it? I asked, my voice sharp. She didn't answer, but the guilt on her face was all I needed to confirm my suspicions. My hands clenched into fists as I strode to the door and flung it open. Sure enough, there he was, Aiden, standing there with a sheepish expression and a bouquet of flowers in his hand. You've got to be kidding me, I muttered under my breath. Is Sarah here? Aiden asked, his voice tentative. I stepped forward, blocking his view of the apartment. You've got some nerve showing up here, I growled. Do you have any idea what you've done? What you've destroyed? He shifted uncomfortably, glancing past me to where Sarah now stood, frozen in the doorway of the living room. I just wanted to talk to her, he said, his voice faltering under the weight of my glare. You've talked enough? I snapped. You've done enough. Sarah, please, he called out, ignoring me. I just want to make sure you're okay. Don't you dare, I said, turning back to her. Don't you dare even think about defending him. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she just stared at us, her eyes wide with fear and shame. I turned back to Aiden, my voice low and dangerous. You need to leave now. And if you ever come near her, or me, again, you'll regret it. He hesitated, looking at Sarah one last time, before finally stepping back. I'm sorry, he said, though whether the words were meant for me, or for her, I couldn't tell. Then he turned and walked away, the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. I slammed the door shut, the force of it rattling the walls. When I turned back to Sarah, she was crying again, her sobs filling the silence. I don't even know who you are anymore, I see. Said, my voice hollow. I thought I knew you, but I was wrong. Please, she begged, her voice breaking. Don't leave me, I'll do anything to fix this. I shook my head, and the weight of her betrayal too much to bear. You already left me, Sarah. The moment you let him into your life, you left me. And with that, I walked out, the door closing behind me like the final chapter of a book I never wanted to read. The days that followed were a blur of anger, pain, and relentless questions that echoed in my mind. How could she do this? How could she destroy everything we'd built together? I alternated between blaming her and blaming myself, wondering if there had been something I could have done to stop this from happening. The torment was relentless, a storm that refused to settle. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, laughing, touching, sharing the kind of intimacy I thought was reserved for us. I hated her for it. I hated him more. But beneath all that anger was something darker, a desire I'd never felt before. Revenge. I spent hours in the quiet of my car, parked outside their office building. It was reckless, obsessive even, but I needed to see him, to put a face to the man who had shattered my world. And when I finally did, my anger hardened into something cold and calculated. He wasn't special. He wasn't better than me. He was ordinary, unremarkable. And yet, he had taken everything from me. Sarah had texted me a few times, her messages a mix of apologies and desperate pleas for me to come home. I ignored them all. I couldn't go back. Not yet. Not until I'd figured out what to do next. I didn't want to be the man who forgave her, who let her betrayal go unanswered. She had taken something from me, and now I wanted to take something from her. The plan started to form slowly, piece by piece. I began collecting evidence, screenshots of their messages, photos of her with Aiden, anything that would expose the truth. It wasn't enough for her to feel guilty. I wanted her to face the consequences of her actions, and I wanted him to feel the weight of what he'd done. But revenge isn't a straight path. As I pieced together my plan, I couldn't ignore the memories that kept surfacing. The good times, the love we'd shared. I found myself questioning if revenge was truly what I wanted. Would it bring me peace? Or would it only drag me deeper into the darkness that was consuming me? One night, as I sat alone in the apartment I'd rented after leaving Sarah, I opened her messages again. Her words were desperate, raw, and filled with regret. She begged for a chance to explain, to make things right. Part of me wanted to delete them all, to erase every trace of her from my life. But another part of me, perhaps the part that still loved her, wanted to hear her out. I called her the next morning. Her voice on the other end of the line was shaky, filled with a mix of relief and apprehension. "I need to see you," she said. "Please." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small cafe we used to frequent, the memories of happier times haunting me as I sat across from her. She looked different, tired, broken, a shadow of the woman I once loved. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know that doesn't mean much right now, but I need you to know how sorry I am." I said nothing, letting her words hang in the air. "I made a mistake," she continued. A horrible, unforgivable mistake. But it wasn't because I stopped loving you. I was lost. I felt like I was drowning, and Aiden was a lifeline. But I see now that he wasn't saving me. He was pulling me further under. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to dismiss them as excuses, but there was a sincerity in her voice that I couldn't ignore. "And now?" I asked, my tone sharp. "Where does he fit into all of this?" "He doesn't," she said quickly. "I ended it the moment you found out. He meant nothing to me. Not in the way you do." The bitterness in my chest swelled. "If I mean so much to you, why wasn't I enough?" She flinched, tears streaming down her face. "I don't have an answer for that," she admitted. "All I can say is that I was weak, and I made the worst mistake of my life, and I'll regret it for the rest of my days." I wanted to hate her, to hold on to my anger and let it fuel me. But as I sat there, watching her crumble under the weight of her guilt, I realized that my anger was only hurting me. Revenge wouldn't heal the wounds she'd inflicted. It would only deepen them. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally, my voice breaking. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again." She nodded, her tears falling freely now. I understand. And if you can't, I'll accept that. But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I've done. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us. When we finally left the cafe, I felt lighter. Not because the pain was gone, it wasn't, but because I had taken the first step toward letting it go. That night, I deleted the evidence I'd gathered, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me. I wasn't going to let it consume me. I would move on. Not for her, but for myself. Moving on wasn't a clean or simple process. Pain lingers, and healing isn't linear. Some days, I felt like I was making progress, reclaiming the pieces of my life that Sarah's betrayal had shattered. Other days, the weight of what had happened crushed me all over again. The memories, her laugh, her touch, her whispered promises of forever, would resurface, uninvited, and pull me back into the storm of anger and heartbreak. But I was determined. I couldn't stay in that dark place forever. So, I started rebuilding, one step at a time. I threw myself into my work, designing projects with a focus and intensity that hadn't been there before. It became a form of therapy, a way to channel the emotions I didn't know how to process. My colleagues noticed the shift, complimenting me on the creativity and detail in my designs. They didn't know the real reason for my newfound dedication, but that didn't matter. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control over something. I also reached out to friends I'd lost touch with during my relationship with Sarah. At first, it was awkward, explaining what had happened, answering their concerned questions. But their support reminded me that I wasn't alone. They helped me rediscover parts of myself that I'd forgotten: my love for hiking, my passion for photography, my ability to find joy in small, everyday moments. Slowly, I began to feel like myself again, though a version of myself that had been irrevocably changed. Sarah, for her part, respected my boundaries. She didn't contact me again after our meeting at the cafe, and I appreciated that. It gave me the space I needed to figure out what I wanted, who I wanted to be. I knew she was struggling with her own guilt, and while I didn't wish her pain, I also didn't feel responsible for her healing. That was her journey, just as mine was mine. As the weeks turned into months, the idea of forgiveness started to feel less impossible. Not forgiveness in the sense of rekindling what we had. That ship had sailed. But forgiveness as a way to let go of the anger that still clung to me, threatening to poison everything good in my life. I didn't want to carry that weight anymore. I deserved better than that. One day, I found myself back at the cafe where Sarah and I had met for the last time. I hadn't planned to go there, but something drew me to it. Sitting at a table near the window, watching the world go by, I felt a strange sense of peace. I realized that I was finally ready to let go, not just of Sarah, but of the pain, the anger, the bitterness. I was ready to move forward. I pulled out a notebook from my bag and started writing. At first, the words came slowly, haltingly, but then they poured out of me, a letter to Sarah that I would never send. In it, I thanked her for the good times, for the love we'd shared before everything fell apart. I acknowledged the pain she had caused, but I also acknowledged the strength it had given me. And finally, I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. When I finished, I closed the notebook and took a deep breath. The weight I'd been carrying for so long felt lighter, almost bearable. For the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. Not out of obligation, but because I felt genuinely hopeful for the future. Life moved on, as it always does. I met new people, made new memories, and allowed myself to feel again. The scars of Sarah's betrayal would always be there, a reminder of what I'd been through. But they no longer defined me. They were just a part of my story, a story that was far from over. As I walked out of the cafe that day, the sun was shining and the world felt full of possibility. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. I had survived the betrayal. I had survived the pain. And now I was ready to truly live again.